It is the most wonderful time of the year. College basketball season is at the 11th hour. Simultaneously, we got the coaching carousel rolling. The transfer portal isn't open yet, but it is popping, and we got a lot to talk about in the next hour. Welcome into the show, everybody. You're watching the CBS Sports Network. We are halfway through with the Sweet 16 with another 4 great games coming up tonight. First thing we are going to do is to talk about last night's winners and look forward to those guys squaring off in tomorrow night's Elite Eight. I'm going to bring in Isaac Trotter to help me break that down. And while he welcomes in, first of all, we're going to talk about first of all, thank you to everyone who watched our preview shows. 100,000 people watched the replay of those previews for the Sweet 16. Obviously, we are halfway through with that. Also going to welcome Kyle Tucker to today's show. Now, fellas, I think you both have written extensively about Illinois throughout the course of the season. They had, I think, what most would describe as an improbable win, road win, some might say, against Houston last night. Some people had it in their bracket. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying. But Kyle, I wanted to ask you just did a really in-depth feature on the origins of their offense. Trotter and I had broken that down in a previous episode, but what really struck me was the pattern recognition part that you mentioned. Can you tell our viewers a little bit more about how that was important?
Yeah, it's super fascinating. Also, I would just say talking to Tyler Underwood is quite an experience, to hear him talk about the way he's sort of conceived of this offense. And a lot of people have talked about the actual scheming and Xing and Oing of it, but part of that making it work is the pattern recognition. And he kept harping on that idea that it's so important for us, recognition, cognition. And so the obvious follow-up it was, do you test for that? Do you actually try to find out before you bring players in how good they are at that? And they said yes. They use the S2 test, which has gotten a lot of run. People have heard about it from NFL quarterbacks. It's kind of, I think, in a lot of circles replaced the Wonderlic, which was a very flawed test. The S2 is more about that sort of thing, the cognition, the pattern recognition. How do you visually process? Because the way they've structured this offense, when you're 5 out, when you've got a 6'6" point guard, when you've got a guy like Stojakovic who can drive, and then you've got 6'9" and 7-foot guys who shoot threes on the perimeter. There's a lot of options, and you go matchup hunting. They talked about Beards, James Harden's. They go hunting for the bad defenders. And so much of that is that instant recognition of this guy has the matchup, or if we run pick and roll right now and they switch everything, I'm gonna get switched onto the Beard and I'm gonna attack him. It's one of the reasons that they hit on Keaton, because nobody, and I said to Tyler Underwood, you're not gonna lie to me and tell me you knew this was gonna happen, right? And he said, no, of course not. Like we really loved the way he was this elite decision maker and quick processor, and the tests bear out what you would see and when you saw him recruiting. But to go from at best 150th ranked to and most services had him worse, to a top 10 pick, somebody saw something there, and that was one of the things they thought, with his size and all his other skill set, if he processes fast and plays in this offense, he's going to be a killer, and he certainly has been.
No doubt about that, Trotter. That reminded me, reading Kyle's story, of what you mentioned in our preview about the importance of their bigs being able to make quick decisions against that Houston pick and roll coverage where they were going to put 2 on the ball and then you knew they were going to scramble out of it. So I really thought I just saw the connective tissue between Kyle's reporting and your analysis as we went in last night. How much of that do you think was critical, and what turned out to be a great defensive performance for Illinois as well?
Yeah, the defense, I think, was the story, but I do believe like the high IQ processing from Keaton Wagler paired with a high IQ processing from Tommy Avicic and David Mirkovic, that's when it kind of levels up from a good team into a really, really tough team. And you listen to Brad Underwood's press conferences, he always talks about like, hey, we just need like their IQ on the floor, and it's problem solving on the fly. And Illinois, I think, has done a really good job of playing fast in the half court, but honestly slow overall, right? Like they make quick decisions, 0.5-second basketball in the half court, but they're in reality, they're kind of playing slow and kind of squeezing the life out of these defenses over and over and over again until they get the shot that they want. And one other extra thing with Illinois too, they have a gold, silver, bronze, and no medal system for their offense. Every possession gets charted with one of those like different medals. Last night, even against a Houston defense that was elite, Illinois was able to kind of carve them up and generate a ton of gold medal possessions, which are shots at the rim, open catch and shoot threes, no turnovers. Like those are those type of elite possessions, and you can't do that without high IQ players.
This is right up my alley of complete basketball nerdom. So I'm thrilled for this conversation. Kyle, let me ask you this. How much of like when you watch them, when you scout them, it doesn't seem like there is a lot that is predetermined. Is there any time in your reporting where they say like, okay, we're gonna run, whatever, floppy to a sideline ball screen, or is it all just kind of a modern iteration of like read and react motion type offense?
Very read and react. I mean, it's randomized was a word that came up a lot when you talk to Tyler Underwood, when you like talking to Keaton, he said the crazy thing about the way this is designed is that there aren't a bunch of set plays that they're running, that they're hunting the good matchup. They're hunting the whether it's a numbers game, and that's another thing Tyler talked about is like it's finding the advantage, whether if you double Keaton than finding the one open guy. Or if you don't and everybody's one-on-one, it's just, I love how many possessions you'll see when they're literally five around the arc and the ball is just whipped around until they find that guy. And it's either they shoot out, the guy's 8 inches taller and he's a three-point shooter and it's nice and easy, or it's Stojakovic, who's going to go take his man off the dribble. And by the way, the last two games, I think he's really elevated into being this nightmarish threat when you are so worried about the perimeter. I mean, I don't know if it was a great shot, but it sure was beautiful. The like mid-range free throw line turnaround fadeaway jumper that he hit last night. He hit one of those also in the game against VCU, and then posterized a couple people on drives. I think he's become one of the great like slashing wing players in the country. And when you have that, and then multiple 7-foot guys making threes, I don't know what you do with that.
Yeah, I think I could get to the rim with that kind of spacing, to be honest. But credit to him. It's so counterintuitive too to be the son of like this all-time great shooter and to be more of like this driver and scorer than he is a shot maker, certainly by the numbers. Want to turn the page a little bit and talk about tonight. Now, there is another player that we have both written about recently, and that is Caden Boozer. And Kyle, you dug into that last week. This morning on CBSSports.com, I dug into just the basketball perspective because he's facing a St. John's team, which is going to be extremely aggressive defensively. They're going to be physical. They're going to play hard. Rick Pitino, I think, has almost like patented the importance of charting deflections over the years. I know that's a coach you've covered for a long time. And of course, we don't really know the status of Caleb Foster. They say he's going to give it a go. Frankly, I'm perplexed how everybody can come back from a broken foot in 3 weeks in this NCAA tournament or play on a broken foot. Apparently, a broken foot doesn't mean what it used to mean. But
Surgically repaired in his case.
Yeah, I just don't get it. So tell me about what you were able to learn given what in your time talking to Caden, in your time talking to Shire and those people around the Duke program.
Well, I think you know this probably as well as anybody, following him for a while now. One is that idea, I think the lead of my story is like, it's such a strange thing to be like, can this McDonald's All-American who's won every championship there ever is to win in his lifetime, can he lead Duke in this moment? But it's because, frankly, at the beginning of the season, he was a massive defensive liability. He was not playing well enough to be on the floor any more than he was. I mean, he played plenty. He was a contributing factor, but obviously Caleb Foster was making it run. I do think he sort of accepted where he was at the beginning of the year and just started working at it. I mean, he's been working with their assistant Tyler Thornton, who played obviously point guard for Krzyzewski. They did all these sort of individual pre and post practice things to really focus on, okay, this is what you are as a player. These are your limitations defensively. Here are some like tips and tricks, and here are like the ways you can sort of mitigate that and be able to stay on the floor. And then in terms of running a team, I think that's not really ever been a question to me. And I don't think he's going to dazzle anybody, but I think even thinking about tonight, like he's just so steady. He's not a guy who seems like he panics very often. I've watched people throw double teams at him. Also, the fact that he's played like 40 minutes a game basically since he had to take over in this role, and he's not
Yeah.
breaking down. He's not breaking down late
No,
in
no.
games. Um, I think steadiness is the word I would use. It's the word that everybody around him uses. There was no sense in that locker room that like, oh, we got to win in spite of this guy. I don't think they're going to win because of him, other than the fact that they'll win because he won't wilt in this moment. Like I don't think the moment's too big. I don't think the pressure will get to him. It's just, he's not a great shooter, right? Like that hurts a little bit. But I think as long as he doesn't turn the ball over and he finds the open guy and he's not just a massive defensive liability, and I don't think St. John's can put him in a position where he's, going to get hunted too much. Yeah, I think they've got a chance.
One of the interesting things was I talked to multiple coaches in the ACC in preparing this article about Caden, and the shooting is the thing that came up. And I had a couple different people tell me, "Hey, we just didn't guard him. We dared him to shoot." And then I had another program say, "We didn't guard him at first, and then we realized that was a mistake, not because we were worried about his jumper, but because he's so good at utilizing that space. He utilizes that space to make better decisions as a passer. This is someone who always had a better than 3-to-1 assist to turnover ratio in high school. It's just slightly under that this year at Duke. He utilizes that space to get the right angle on the ball screen action, which Duke is very precise with. And I think maybe the most underrated part of his game is what a good finisher he is inside the lane, because he's not this big time leaper, and yet he's converts a really high percentage because he's so balanced, because he's so strong, because he's got that size and good natural touch. So I thought it was this really interesting point about, hey, conventional wisdom is you gap him, you dare him to shoot, you go under ball screens. But then you realize people have done that to him for so long that he just knows how to manipulate it and take advantage of it. So I think that's going to be one of the really interesting subplots of tonight's game against St. John's, where Rick Pitino, we know, is going to pressure. Don't go anywhere. We got a whole lot more college basketball talk coming up next. You're watching the CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the CBS Sports Network, where we have half of the Elite Eight ready to go. The other half will be decided tonight, but we're going to start by breaking down Saturday's matchup, scheduled for a 6:09 tip Eastern time. We've got the all Big Ten matchup between Iowa and Illinois. Both of those teams won the right to advance on Thursday night. And it's a rematch. Illinois defeated Iowa 75-69. That was on the road, but that was 2.5 months ago. Trotter, as you assess this Big Ten clash, how do you size this one up?
Well, it's really going to come down to half-court execution. I don't think we're going to see many transition buckets in either of these games. I think especially when it comes to Iowa, like they love to shrink the game down and make it slow. That kind of plays right into what Illinois wants to do as well. Illinois is very comfortable operating in the half court. So in my head, I think it comes down to just the glass. First off, like if you cannot keep Illinois off the offensive glass, you're kind of dead on arrival. Houston learned that the wrong way last night. And I think that's a major, major key for Iowa. Now, Ben McCollum, I have as much respect for him in a 40-minute game as anybody, but Illinois is definitely the more talented roster top to bottom, and they're a lot bigger. So I feel like we'll get into some of the other things, but like I'm just kind of curious of like which lineups does Ben McCollum go with? Because when Tavion Banks and Cam Manyow are on the floor together, I do think Iowa can keep Illinois off the glass, but their spacing stinks. When Alvaro Forgairis and Tate Sage are on the floor together, they can space Illinois out, but can they rebound out of it? So it's like it's a tough matchup here, I think, for Iowa. I lean Illinois at first, but I mean, Ben McCollum, Bennett Sturts, it's really hard to bet against those two dudes.
All right, so I've got one quick point to make, and then I'm coming back because I want to hear a path. Like, give Iowa fans, give Chris Hassel a pathway to a Final Four appearance for Iowa. But before we do, I will say this. If I'm Illinois, I feel slightly better about this game. I'm actually glad to be playing Iowa in the Elite Eight and not the Sweet 16, only because of the shorter turnaround. Like, Ben McCollum is not the guy I want to play when you have 5 days of prep. I go back to that comment he made in that Florida game. Well, it was right after the Florida game. And he said, I noticed something on tape last night that I thought we were able to exploit. He never elaborated on what that point was, but it goes to show that like he was still looking for those edges on day 4 of the prep, trying to find those margins which he could exploit. And apparently, based on what he said, unless he was just saying it to get under Todd Golden's skin, which could have been an advantage in and of itself, he was able to find those edges on day 4. So if I'm Illinois, I'm feeling pretty good about the fact that like, hey, he's got less than 48 hours to turn this one around. But we'll see what happens. So again, my question to you, the pathway for Iowa, they can win this game if they what?
I think it comes down to the role players. Tate Sage has to keep playing really well and cutting at a high level. Alvaro Fergairis needs to be able to make those pick and pop threes that he's been really knocking down at a high level here in the NCAA tournament. And then honestly, to me, the X factor is Tavion Banks. He is absolutely a dog. And when he plays well, Iowa's a really, really tough team. He can go toe to toe with much bigger guys that Illinois will certainly have in that front line. And they need him defensively. Like he is going to be the guy that gets the David Mirkovic assignment. He has to be able to win those matchups, not let Mirkovic kill them as a scorer or as a distributor. And then he just has to go to war on the glass. So those 3 guys feel like the major role players, because on paper, I do think Illinois can guard Bennett Sturtz really, really well. Kylan Boswell has matched up against Sturtz before earlier this season and gave him fits for that 40-minute game. And I think it's going to come down to these role players needing to, kind of play their B+, A- games if Iowa wants to pull this off and make the Final Four.
I'll say this. The other thing about Iowa that I don't think people have a great appreciation for is how many turnovers their defense forces. Because they play this slower style and people tend to associate forcing turnovers with an up-tempo system, it's a little bit counterintuitive. But I wonder if they can't turn Illinois over, what then happens to their defense? And it's a really good question. I'll say this too. I think the other X factor is just, what if Bennett Sturtz just has a game? Like, I know he's playing 40 minutes and he's been great. I would say even better than the numbers show. But what if he just gets hot and makes like 6 or 7 threes? That is not out of the realm of possibility that just he raises the level of his game. I'm going Illinois. They were my Final Four pick from day one. Who do you have in this one?
Yeah, I just lean Illinois as well. I think there's enough defenders that you can target with that Iowa lineup that for an Illinois team that just has so many different scores, like they're going to find the mismatches like we talked about in the first segment that they want.
All right. In the West region, scheduled for an 8:49 Eastern time tip, we've got the 1 and 2 seed Arizona versus Purdue. Trotter, here's my take, and then I want to get yours. I think Arizona can match Purdue's size, whether it's Clough or Trey Kaufman-Renn inside. You got Mo Cleavas and Koa Pete, not to mention Toby Awaka coming off the bench, who I think is as good of a backup big man as there is in college basketball. I think the advantage that Purdue normally has in terms of just size and strength in the paint is negated in this one. I think Arizona can beat them with pace. The tempo of this game is going to be a really important variable. Purdue wants to walk the ball up the floor and make this an execution match. Arizona wants to play with pace, get downhill in transition, get into their ball screen action pretty quickly and put a ton of pressure on the rim, both early in the shot clock and then on the offensive glass. So all of those things to me point towards an Arizona advantage. If we were to say, okay, how can Purdue win this game? Number one, Braden Smith needs to be the best version of himself. I don't think we have seen that yet in this NCAA tournament. I was surprised he missed that game winner last night. Thankfully, Trey Kaufman-Renn, if you're a Purdue fan, was there to clean it up. Whether or not he committed an offensive foul, pushing that player under the rim, we'll leave that for social media to figure out. But they need the best version of Braden Smith, not only taking care of the basketball, finding others, but making open shots. And making shots is going to be critical for them in this game. Fletcher Loyer has been shooting the heck out of the ball the last couple of games. CJ Cox gave him a big lift in the round of 32. We know Purdue has very limited depth. And in a game where I don't know they can get an advantage on the front line, and Arizona's got more athleticism, more pace to them, Purdue has got to make shots against an Arizona team that will not try and beat you from behind the arc. But how do you break down this one?
Yeah, I think you nailed a lot of the points I was thinking about with pace. I thought Arkansas was a terrible matchup, right? Like they run with Arizona and you just can't do that. And you can't they didn't protect the rim, right? That's a really, really bad combination against an Arizona front line. But Purdue, they're going to play a lot slower. They're going to drag this game into a half court matchup. They're going to make Arizona shoot a ton of jumpers. Oscar Clough and Trey Kaufman-Renn will not have to leave the paint. Like if Koa Pete wants to take 8 17-footers, knock yourself out, dude. Like if Mo Krivas wants to take pick and pop threes, knock yourself out, man. Like they're going to sit in the paint all game long and try to force Arizona to beat them with a steady barrage of jumpers and give them nothing in transition. So that's I think the path for Purdue to hang in this. I just think Arizona's just too big, too athletic. And that's just the ultimate problem that Purdue has. Purdue has not been the most athletic team this year. And I agree with you. There's not a lot of pathways for Purdue to create great shots. So I do think Arizona wins. This isn't a betting show, but I thought 6.5 was a little bit too high because I do think Purdue will dictate the pace similarly to what they did against Michigan. A lot of those same Michigan tentacles kind of apply in this game. So it's good prep. But at the same time, I just think Arizona has just too many options right now.
KenPom's got this at a 4-point margin, 80-76, which is lower than the betting markets. But I will say this. I think if it gets into the 70s and the 80s, Purdue's not going to win. Their hope is based on keeping this in candidly, like in the 50s or 60s. The more they can slow it down, the better their chance is. Purdue has the number 1 offense in the sport by the metrics. Arizona has the number 3 defense. I would argue, though, they are currently playing as good as any defense in the country. This one's going to be a battle, man. It is going to be worth every viewing experience you can find on Saturday. It is the nightcap. The winner goes to the Final Four. Don't go anywhere. Trotter and I are coming right back. We're going to be joined by Travis Branham. Kyle Tucker is going to come back on, and we're going to talk everything going on at North Carolina because, candidly, there's quite a lot going on. That's coming up next right here on the CBS Sports Network. The big news in the coaching carousel this week was the firing, I guess we would say, of Hubert Davis after he reportedly refused to resign. We're going to dig into that as well as some of the candidates. We are also on coaching carousel watch at Kansas as we figure out as Bill Self figures out what his future is going to look like. Trotter, as it pertains to North Carolina, let me start with you. There's been a lot of talk about whether this was or wasn't the right move. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it was unequivocally the right move. Hubert Davis did win 70% of his games. That's a fact. But when you kind of dig underneath the surface, like the results weren't good enough. You average out the North Carolina's finish over the last 5 years. They were about 26th on KenPom on average. Does Carolina want to be the 26th best team in the country every single year? Obviously not. Like the 4 times they made the NCAA tournament, their average seed was a 7 seed. So then when you factor in your 25 and 44 in quad 1 games, that's just not good enough. That's not the Carolina standard at all. So I think overall, 70% of your wins, that's a great stat to trot out. But when you kind of dig into it, there was a standard that Carolina has and Hubert Davis wasn't meeting it.
I'll just say this too. I thought this year they were unlucky this year. You can say that, but I don't think the prospectus for next year was as I think they were going to be worse next year unless they were able to find gold in the portal. Trav, there's been a lot of reporting about who the candidates are, but you were as plugged in as anyone I know to all things information based around the college game. What are you hearing in terms of some of the most likely candidates?
Yeah, the top 2 names that I can continue to hear over the past few days is one, Tommy Lloyd, head coach at Arizona. He was asked questions about it just in recent days as he was preparing for his Sweet 16 matchup last night with Arkansas, and he didn't necessarily deny any sort of involvement. He had a long-winded answer to saying his focus remains with Arizona. I believe what he is saying there. However, North Carolina sounds very keen on Tommy Lloyd, but if they're going to have to wait on Tommy, I think that's going to drag out a few weeks, not to mention the price that's going to come into play with getting Tommy Lloyd out of his deal at Arizona. It's nearly $10 to $12 million buyout, and then obviously you got to pay the salary on top of it. The number 2 candidate that I continue to hear is Billy Donovan, the Chicago Bulls head coach. And everybody knows what's happening with the Chicago Bulls. The organization is in very rough shape, and it sounds like it's more than likely going to be his final season. And a return to college and a return to North Carolina is something he could be very interested in. So all things, when you gather in all the information and you try to project which direction was it going to go. And again, this is my just gut, my feeling here of what's going to happen. If I was a betting man, I would bet that Billy Donovan will probably end up the next head coach at North Carolina.
And Kyle, you had a story exactly on that potential. What did your reporting lead you to conclude?
I mean, most of what I wrote was just that, like, anytime I throw that out there about whether it be the Kentucky job a couple of years ago or the Carolina job now, is that he hasn't coached in 11 years in college basketball. Like, why would anybody want that? And my counter argument to that is there's never been a better time to hire a guy from the NBA, because college basketball is professional basketball, and success in college basketball is roster management. It's building a front office. It is understanding salary cap limitations. It's all the stuff that the NBA organizations are built around. If you look at the great young coaches, or not necessarily even young, but the next generation of great coaches in college basketball, they run their programs a lot like NBA teams. It's the reason a lot of those guys are going to be getting on the coaching lists when NBA openings come open. John Shire is one of those guys. He runs his operation at Duke. It's why it's the one blue blood still thriving when the others are flailing, is that they run it like a pro organization. I would say Nate Oates, and not all of them necessarily run their program like a pro organization, but almost all of them at least run a pro sort of, some element of their program is very pro forward. Nate Oates, runs a very pro style program. I would say Dusty May at Michigan does the same. And so to me, there's never been a moment in college basketball history where it makes more sense for somebody, one who won at the highest level in college in the previous era, obviously back-to-back national championships, 4 Final Fours, 6 SEC championships at Florida, but then went to the NBA. He was, part of an organization that was building, an OKC, building towards and sort of set the table for what they've become. He also, by the way, hired Mark Daigneault onto his staff at Florida, who led the Thunder to a championship. I think he is just perfectly positioned, frankly, for this moment in time in what college basketball has become. I don't think the fact that he hasn't been around it really matters. Like recruiting isn't impressing mom at the dinner table anymore. It's not not 3 head coaches like running into each other in somebody's driveway and having like a Will Ferrell style fight in the street. It's come to the table, let's negotiate. What's the best offer? What's the best system? All of those things. And I think a guy from the NBA could absolutely do that.
Trav, one of the narratives around Billy Donovan in the past was he didn't want to deal with recruiting. He didn't want to deal with all the other stuff, BS you may call it, that goes along with being a college head coach. What are some of the challenges beyond just roster building that face the next North Carolina head coach, whether it's Billy Donovan or anyone else?
Yeah, the situation behind the scenes at North Carolina is very interesting. One thing that they're currently going through, and this has been well documented, well talked about throughout the whole course of the season, is just they're behind on their resources. Their resources at this point are outdated. And there's a strong push and pull within the program and people outside of the program on what exactly they want to do. They're very passionate, obviously, about their tradition, as they should be. And so there's been a bit of a fight going on in terms of where they want to go moving forward with all their resources and within the arena. Additionally, the biggest one is Bill Belichick. They've invested so much money and resources into this football program and trying to reignite this football program, push it forward and make it a premier program within all of college football. And so that's taking up a tremendous amount of resources, both within the athletic department and within the rev share and NIL collective sharing. So whoever comes in next, they're going to have some serious conversations on what the funding of the basketball program is going to look like moving forward.
So Trav, quick follow-up from me on, go ahead.
I was just going to throw in there, along those lines, you think about, you're paying Hubert $5.3 million to go away. You're paying his general manager multiple $1 million to go away. If you hire Tommy Lloyd, you're adding another $10 million up front. So you're $20 million in the hole before you start paying a new coach and a new staff and a new roster. And they are not just swimming Scrooge McDuck style in money right now. And they're trying to build a new arena. And there's all of these pulls on them financially. And so, like, I've heard people say you don't fire Hubert and care about the buyout. Well, you do if you don't have a lot of money. you do. And so, like, the practicality of, like, Billy Donovan doesn't have a buyout. If, who else has, a reasonable buyout? Those are the candidates I'm going to start to look at, because to me, I think it's absolutely reckless on their part financially if they do throw millions and millions of dollars at this next guy, and then you've got to go figure out how to pay your roster. Do you handcuff him before he even starts?
And Trav, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole with this one, so keep this one macro if you could. But my understanding is if they are allocating a lot of their rev share budget to football, then that means that beyond what they give to basketball, the remainder of that, let's call it salary pool, has to come through NIL, and that's associated with the question marks around this new NIL Go system. Is that a fair, albeit general, summary of what things would look like for a program that's heavily invested in football from a rev share perspective?
I mean, a little bit. Most of it is just the fact you're going to have to continue to rely heavily on your boosters who are investing in multiple programs. Now you're having to invest in Hubert Davis's buyout. Now you're having to invest in somebody like Tommy Lloyd's $10 to $12 million buyout. Then you're having to invest in that salary, the staff salary, and so on. Then that's all out of the pocket. And now you've got to, those same boosters have to also try to help you with the NIL collectives. Now, when it comes to NIL Go and what's going to be happening with Deloitte and all those things, I mean, you look at what football did, talking around college basketball with all the and on the recruiting scene throughout most of the fall, everybody was questioning what this market would look like, and everybody was anticipating a drop. Then when you watched what happened with college football and within the transfer portal, they blew all the doors off. They didn't care one bit. And so moving into this cycle with this transfer portal ahead, it sounds like college basketball is just going to follow the same footsteps and just not really care too much about those guidelines and just stare at the NCAA and NIL Go and Deloitte. Everybody just do something about it.
You can't possibly be suggesting that the NCAA's rules are unenforceable. Gonna end with this, and Kyle, I will direct this to you. Rick Pitino, I know you spoke to him yesterday. Seemed like he was on fire in the media session. Talked about how there are no more blue bloods. I have this theory that we are going to find out in the next 2 weeks if blue bloods still exist, because North Carolina's open, Kansas could be open. And the applicant pools for those two jobs will tell you if there is still the allure consistent with that blue blood brand. Give me your quick take on what Pitino said and your take on it. Was it just because he doesn't coach at one of them, so he's got to spin it?
The last line of what I wrote today was, somebody offer him one of those jobs and find out if he really means it. Because I have a very strong feeling if Kansas, North Carolina, or Kentucky offered Rick Pitino one last crack at Camelot, as he used to call Kentucky, he'd probably take it. Because there are still inherent advantages. But I think his point is a good one. And I asked all the coaches at the East Regional, so Pitino, Hurley, Izzo, and John Shire, and even Shire, who's the one who still has it going, right, at a blue blood, talked about how he said it can go quickly and you have to be aggressively, not letting that go. And you also have to, I asked him, like, what are the levers you still can pull as a blue blood? And one, he had a really thoughtful answer, Shire did, about, we're still this huge TV draw. We're doing, the blue bloods are doing, if you go look at the ratings, CBS ratings, what are the high, ESPN ratings, what are the highest rated college basketball games every year? It's going to be Kansas, ones that involve Kansas, Kentucky, Duke, Carolina. And you can sell that. That's a piece of it. And then schedule the way Duke did, by the way, put yourself on that stage so that the players that are trying to showcase themselves, I mean, there is inherent value to them in being national television draws. And there are others. I mean, the fact that Shire talked about, you want to be at a place where they actually care about basketball above all else. And there aren't that many of those, right? Everything is still so football driven at other places. There's value in that. But what Pitino said is, like, the huge advantage, where it used to be, we're a blue blood, and so every kid grew up, dreaming of playing there. Danny Hurley said that doesn't happen anymore. He's like, we're dealing with unnostalgic, non-nostalgic people, because most of the people advising players now are agents, and most of the families are not nostalgic or, emotional at all about these decisions. These are like sit down at the negotiating table kind of decisions. And because of that, because of the money, because of the free flowing movement of players, the idea that like just because you have a bunch of banners in your rafters, you're going to be the first choice for the best players is not really the case anymore. I think that is clearly true. And so I don't think blue bloods are dead. I think if the right people are running them, i.e. John Shire at Duke, if they're running them in the right way, like a pro organization, they can still use those advantages and pull the levers that still exist. But that this era has definitely like leveled up the playing field, and we can see it in this tournament right now.
All right, that is all awesome stuff. Next, we're going to talk about some of the players in jeopardy right now, trying to figure out what they're doing, both at North Carolina, NC State, maybe LSU. That's coming up next right here on the CBS Sports Network. As we talk about what's next for North Carolina, of course, a lot of it comes down to the players. I'm going to welcome in Travis Branham and bring in Eric Bossi to help me break this down. And fellas, one of the things that I said right off the bat was going to be really interesting about this North Carolina job was the players who are hanging in the balance. Guys like Henry Vasar, Luka Bogovic, Derek Dixon, and then they've got committed recruits as well. What happens to those players? What happens? Vasar is someone who's going to have to go through the draft process and is, I think, a fringe first round pick. I think it's very possible he gets picked in the first round, but he might get more of a market coming back to college basketball with what we're hearing some of these prices are going to look like. So Bossi, I will go to you first. After we talk about Vasar, is there anyone else on this roster that you say, hey, he's got to be a priority in terms of retaining him? And then secondly, how do you go about handling that if they're not going to have a coach in the near future?
Yeah, I think that's the rub, really, Adam, is before you can really get too far into the weeds on deciding who needs to be back and who needs to be prioritized, you need to figure out your coach first, because who North Carolina fans or who we may think needs to be prioritized, which I would put Derek Dixon and Henri Visar at the very top of the list, may differ from Billy Donovan or whoever they hire. So that's number one. But I think it's a pretty safe bet that Visar and Dixon are guys that you need to prioritize. And then when you start looking at the recruits, it's probably going to matter a lot about how their NIL deals play out. Are they good for whatever coach comes in? Are they null if Hubert Davis was fired? There's still a lot to be figured out with this.
Trav, let's pull back the curtain a little bit, because I think the perception of like, oh, the portal isn't open yet. I'm going to make a statement. You correct me if I'm wrong. The portal is for administrative purposes. A lot of this negotiation is already happening behind the scenes. I'm not saying school A calls player one and says, hey, what do you want? I'm saying school A calls middleman and says, hey, we want this guy, or hey, what's this guy's market? And a lot of that stuff is happening behind the scenes, and by the time somebody's name goes in the portal, it's already 90% done. Is that a fair summary of the way this market is working right now?
Yeah, no question. I mean, that's the reason for why all these players are announcing their intentions to transfer. It's in order to go ahead and get their name out, allow their agents to get a head start on what's happening and lining up potential visits for the spring, and also continue to talk to schools and figure out who are the schools that they're most interested in. So that way, when the portal actually does officially open, they can hit the ground running.
All right, now, Bossi, you mentioned the committed recruits they have. Obviously, Dylan Mingo, Maximo Adams, two of the top players in the country, but we don't have official reporting on what kind of dollar amounts they committed to, but we have heard pretty reliable sources that it was substantial. And I'm not going to ask you to speculate about that, but what I am going to ask you is how might that impact how they go about the decisions of whether to stay committed or whether to go back on the market? Or is that like the transfer portal, really just a formality, and they can, and their representatives can be kind of searching the market for valuations regardless of having to formally decommit?
Yeah, they're certainly testing around to see how much they might be able to get other places, but they're now competing against the transfer portal and where schools want to allocate their resources. Pardon me. So, in a situation where we presume they probably got better deals from North Carolina than anyone else, they've got to match, can I get the same value if I enter the open market again right now? And if North Carolina still wants them, they might be inclined to stick around if they don't think they can match that value elsewhere.
And again, this was why my contention initially was North Carolina couldn't afford to leave this job open for an extended period of time because it gives everybody else a competitive advantage of days or weeks to pre-negotiate with their players, including their own. That's just the reality of it. All right, guys, let's talk about NC State. I don't want to get into the horn's nest of Will Wade leaving and all that. I know there's plenty to talk about there. Gary Parrish dove into it along with Matt Norlander on the Iron College Basketball Podcast. What I am interested in, though, is who is still on this roster. Matt Abel, Paul McNeil, those are both high-level prospects. And Cole Kloer, who arrived at mid-year and redshirted while he was recovering for an injury, so he's already on campus. Trav, I'm going to go to you first. Like, there was a sentiment on social media yesterday that, hey, Will wasn't going to try and take his best guys with him to LSU because there was some sort of like acknowledgement that this didn't go exactly right. But I don't know. That doesn't feel like quite right to me, especially after that press conference. What should we expect for this trio?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, the one who I look at there is Paul McNeil. He was a star guard for them. He really came into his own at NC State over the last 2 seasons, and he's on a really promising trajectory. However, he is a North Carolina native, so I wouldn't rule him as a guy that's definitely going to follow Will Wade to NC State. I actually think there's a real chance that he could continue to figure out who they're going to hire and explore the opportunity of returning to NC State next season. Now, Matt Abel, he's a Florida native, had a lot of Southeast schools recruiting him back when he was in high school as a top 30 recruit. He's one that I'll be looking towards and interested to see what he does, see if he enters transfer portal. But like you said, given the dynamics of this move, I'm not necessarily considering any of these guys as locks to follow him to LSU. Now, the one that I think is probably the most likely to follow him to LSU at this moment is his current high school commitment, Trayvon Carter-Givens. We got him listed in the top 150. He committed Will Wade, has a very tight relationship with him, and he does not have any obvious experience or ties directly to the NC State program. He is currently based out in California. So of all the guys I think is most likely to follow Will to LSU, it's going to be Trayvon.
All right. Now, speaking of LSU, the question I will ask you, Travis, which of those players, if any, I don't want to assume he's going to want to retain much. Do you think Will Wade will want to keep in that program? Obviously, we saw Didon Thomas say that he was going to go into the portal. Mike Nwoko has some additional eligibility, and then they've got 3 committed recruits in Kevin Thomas, Hurley Brutus, and Marcus Vaughn. So what should LSU fans be expecting? Is this like a complete rebuild, or do you think there's anyone here that Will Wade will want to retain?
I could see him wanting to retain a guy like Mike Nwoko. I could also see him wanting to retain a guy like Didon Thomas. But historically, a guy like Didon Thomas is not a player that has necessarily fit the Will Wade mold. Will Wade has always had size in the backcourt. He likes size, length, athleticism, guys who can get up and down the court, who's going to pressure the ball and play fast and aggressive and be disruptive on both ends of the court. And Didon Thomas isn't necessarily that. And he had a very strong relationship with David Patrick, the associate head coach at LSU, who we were waiting to. I'm not sure if he got fired or if he's still there as of right now, but I wouldn't necessarily anticipate a return out of Didon Thomas. And so for the most part, I would anticipate that this is going to be a complete rebuild.
Awesome stuff. As always, don't go anywhere. I have one final thought coming up next right here on the CBS Sports Network. One more piece of news from the coaching carousel yesterday with Boston College hiring UConn assistant coach Luke Murray. Murray is, in my opinion, one of the best young evaluators and offensive tacticians in the game, and I think he has a very real chance to bring Boston College back to respectability if the Eagles can help get him the resources necessary to be competitive. They've got somebody who can carry the program here. Now it's time to lift up the rest of the program. Of course, this is a big day of college basketball. We got a doubleheader tonight from the East Region live on CBS. And in between, you can find all the action on the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube channel, as well as CBS Sports HQ. We will be back here on Monday at 12 noon, right here on the CBS Sports Network.